biography that I'm going to give you practically the full month. So Josh is an expert in converting education and other development investments into innovative programs. He brings extensive expertise in the many dimensions of education and training, and a collaborative approach to the design, implementation, evaluation, and sustainability of programs across development sectors. And it's worth thinking about those four words actually: design, implementation, evaluation, and sustainability, because that's pretty much what it's all about. Over his nearly 40-year career, he's worked domestically and internationally with, I'll read the word, this is one of my favorite words, a panoply of institutions dedicated to creating better futures for children, their parents, and communities. This has taken him from classrooms in suburban Philadelphia to living in refugee settlements in the remote areas of Sudan. We heard a little bit of that story, those of us who had a chance to have lunch with him, and many other locations. He's worked in America, in Africa, in Europe, and Asia. In education, Josh has combined work with classroom teachers, local authorities, communities, and central system and government leaders to improve the quality and delivery and outcomes in areas such as classroom instruction, learning assessment, gender equity and inclusion, technical and vocational training, literacy, and other aspects of education. He's also worked in the areas of economic development, gender equality, agriculture, water, sanitation, health, refugee relief, and integrated community development. In other words, he's touched on probably the interests, the life interests of all or nearly all of you in the room. He's an accomplished educator and thinker, and most recently he's been a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, as well as senior education officer at the Aga Khan Foundation. He is also an alum of Penn. He completed his doctoral and master's studies in the City and Regional Planning Program here at Penn, and we found that we discovered that my dissertation advisor was one of your external examiners. So all the world is a circle. And his BA in Dartmouth at Dartmouth, where he majored in French literature and minored in anthropology. So, without further ado. Penn is sort of formal, I found, so I'll call you Dr. Muskin for all of you. Dr. Muskin.
Thank you very much. All this means is I've been doing this a really long time, and I'm still trying to figure out what I really want to do, which hopefully is hard. Okay, so Geneva Global is the first time I've worked in the private sector. I've worked, I guess I worked for a private school, so that was private 1,000 years ago. But all of my development career until now has been in the NGO sector. Someone asked earlier what the difference is. There's not a huge difference. You're meant to satisfy the people giving you the money to do your work, whether it be a multilateral, bilateral, or a private company, and you're meant to do it in a way that has meaningful impact on the ultimate beneficiary. In my case, usually the children. Okay. Geneva Global is a philanthropy advising firm. My short elevator pitch is we help people with a lot of money who want to spend it in development to spend it well, whether it be in international development or here in the United States. We're looking at high wealth individuals, foundations, philanthropies, and corporate social responsibility to help them do their role well. About a handful of these clients, we call them clients, not donors. About a handful of these clients give us in the vicinity of $5 million a year over the past several years. It's changed, the amount has changed over the years. But this year we've got about $5 million to implement the Speed School program in Ethiopia and Uganda. Okay. Before I get into this, I want to give you a little bit more on my life whoops, I'm pushing the wrong button. On my life path. I'll start with my life path, professional. You don't need to know about it. Introduce you to the Speed School program, cover quickly the evidence that gives me confidence to talk to you about the Speed School program. It's something that has value. Can you hear me in the back?
Yeah.
Okay. And talk about for me, the most exciting part, which is working with the government, where in Ethiopia and Uganda, to move from our implementing a client-funded program to the government's adopting this so that they can move it to scale in a sustainable way. So my professional path, for any of you who come from Philadelphia, at least one of you know GA. Germantown Academy was where I started. I left Dartmouth with a French Lit degree and taught French and Spanish for 3 years. I include this because even though I taught in a very privileged suburban private school, I left here knowing one thing that has been invaluable to me in all of my work in education, which is teaching is difficult. It's hard to do, even when you've just got 15 kids sitting in front of you who have eaten well the night before, slept in lovely places, have all the support they could want from their parents, all the material needs met. Teaching is difficult. And that's important to know because when you are in the position of setting policy or creating programs or training teachers in latest pedagogic methods, you need to understand that that doesn't translate automatically into good learning. That it goes through the teachers and the materials and the whole environment that they have to work with. My latest blog, which I'll send you to at IEDP, International Institute for Education Planning, is on teacher capacity. And I've worked at the 30,000-mile level for too many years where people say the obstacle to getting this into practice, this new method or whatever into practice is teacher capacity. Right. But it's not just what the teachers know and know how to do, what I call intrinsic capacity. It's also the extrinsic capacity, the conditions in which teachers are working. So if you're telling teachers to do continuous assessment, formative assessment, which implies feedback and remediation, which means you have to pause in your delivery of the curriculum, and the inspector comes in and says, January 24th, why aren't you on page 232? That extrinsic factor, even if you are totally committed and capable of formative assessment, is going to block you. Okay. So, having taught for me was vitally important. After finishing at GA, I came here, finished my master's in City and Regional Planning with a focus on broad international development, was able to translate that through the help of a visiting professor at the time to go to Save the Children. Did that just turn? Okay. To Save the Children, where I was this French lit major, and with international development then, was the sector specialist for appropriate technology. Okay. I am not a scientist. Looked at it from the social dimension. I was telling folks earlier that I was sitting in my office in Westport one day, dreaming of going to Cameroon, when someone came in and said, congratulations, you're going to Sudan. 3 weeks later, I was in Sudan, working in a refugee settlement, Eritrean refugee settlement for a little over a year. That ended, and I went to Burundi with ActionAid, UK ActionAid, for a 2-year contract that ended after 4 months because they brought me in to replace a Burundian whom they had fired because of corruption, but hadn't got permission from the government to bring in this Mzungu. So I was sent off waiting for a work permit that never happened. So I came back and said, oh well, I'll finish my PhD. I did that here, did my doctoral research in Cote d'Ivoire, looking at how the primary school education in Cote d'Ivoire prepares children for the informal sector of the economy. Completed that, did a short stint at the World Bank where people heard about my dissertation, and that turned into several consultancies with the World Bank while I was at Florida State University working on a USAID-funded project. Pause there just to make the point that even if you're not expert at something, if you have a good experience with it and are confident that you can do it, you can probably do it. One of my greatest talents, how many of you are familiar with the expression chutzpah? The Yiddish term chutzpah, which means nerve, or saying that you can do things that maybe not necessarily your experience will back up. I got a call one day sitting at my desk at Florida State from a colleague and said, do you know someone who can do training in qualitative assessment? Let me look. So I got out my Rolodex. How many know what a Rolodex is? Okay. You know, business cards, they used to be on literally rolling things that you could go through the alphabet. Fine. Went through my Rolodex, and as I'm going through my Rolodex looking for things, I can do that. So a month later, I was in Mali doing a training on qualitative research. So just to say there are opportunities that appear, have confidence that's based on something other than just imagination, but you can do it. Left Florida State University for World Learning and at the Washington, D.C. office, where, again, I was mostly working in the USAID realm, managing programs in Ethiopia, Guatemala, Peru, and some other little things in between. Got a call from a friend saying, we just won a project in Morocco that I had bid on at World Learning, and she said, our chief of party candidate bowed out. Would you like to go to Morocco as chief of party? Okay, why not?
They probably don't know what chief, many of them.
Oh, chief of party is the project director. Okay, I don't know why they call it chief of party, but it sounds more fun. Right. Right. So I was in Morocco for 6 years, leading one and then launched another project. Dan came as a consultant to do some literacy work with us, which was very fun to have my former thesis advisor as a colleague. Went from there to Switzerland to work for the Aga Khan Foundation, which is a European-based foundation that is linked to a vast network of economic activities, airlines, hotels, hydroelectric, telecommunications, and also does good works around the world. And then moved from Switzerland to Paoli, Pennsylvania to join Geneva Global. Couldn't convince them to open a Geneva office, so I came to the suburbs of Philadelphia to join Geneva Global, where I'm now leading the speech school program. My work has taken me pretty much around the world, as Alex said, Central America and the Caribbean, South America, South Africa, Southern Africa, Western Africa, Eastern Africa, from Europe, Central Asia, Southeast Asia. It's been fun. When I was young, I got the travel bug, and the only thought I had that would be a job that I could take that would allow me to travel was airline steward. Fortunately, I came up with another solution. So, the Speed School. The goal of the Speed School is to support governments and communities in bringing out-of-school children back into the classroom. Out-of-school children aged, I think I made it, but I've got it on the the screen later, aged 8 to 14. Out-of-school children include children who have never been in the classroom and children who have dropped out in grades 1, 2, or 3. In Ethiopia, there are the government counts over 2 million out-of-school children in a country of, I forget whether it's 70 or 90 million. And the UN agencies count as many as 4 million out-of-school children. I forget the numbers for Uganda. We do this with the idea of providing children with basic literacy and basic numeracy and broader learning competencies so that they can return to the formal government schooling with their age peers, okay, rather than have an 11 or 12-year-old sitting at a grade 1 desk with all these little kids. One of the challenges that my colleague mentions, my colleague running the program in Ethiopia mentions is this age group gets lost between formal education and non-formal education, because much of non-formal education is either vocational for older youth or literacy for adults. And then they can't get back into the classroom because they've aged out. So having something like this meets a very important need. Okay. So the model has 5 major components with the classroom in the middle. We operate a classroom, and I'll tell you more about the classroom in just a moment. Connected to the classroom are self-help groups. We reach out to the mothers of all of the children in the speed school classroom and help them. The original model was with economic empowerment, with the idea that poverty is one of the main drivers in their children being out of school in the first place. So we want to give them additional income so that they can afford the modest costs, both direct costs and more substantial opportunity costs of sending their children to the formal classroom. There are no costs to being in a speed school classroom, but we want them to continue. And schooling's free in both countries, but that there are still costs for uniforms and materials and PTA membership and all kinds of things like that. We started out with that, focusing on economic empowerment. We have realized that economic empowerment is only one part of it. So we started to put emphasis also on social empowerment and on functional literacy in Ethiopia. And a study that we had done for us in Uganda showed that malaria and family-based violence are huge drivers of out-of-school, children being out of school in northern Uganda, which has experienced a lot of violence over the past decades. So we want to address those aspects too. Primary school support, we train teachers in what we call the link schools. Every speed school is associated with a formal government school where the students are likely to enroll after completing the speed school year. And we want to be sure that the teachers receiving them are training them in ways that will be more welcoming and more effective for them so that they're not completely shocked and drop out again. We also want to prevent future school dropouts. So we're working with the teachers in these schools. Actually, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to Ethiopia, where the government has asked us to help to train their trainers who are going to be training teachers for school improvement, quality improvement in 2000, and now I just learned the other day, they're doubling into 4,000 schools around the country. So talking to them about how they can use what we've been doing in these alternative classrooms in the formal classrooms. We work in preschool again to prevent future dropouts. In Ethiopia, we use a UNICEF model called Child to Child. One school child works with 5 preschool children and helps them with their pre-literacy and pre-numeracy and getting accustomed to an education environment. And in Uganda, we basically just government's early childhood model. And then in Uganda only, we're doing community schools. For the communities that are too remote, where there is no school, the government has a system where they sort of technically but not financially help communities establish their own schools, and as the schools reach certain benchmarks, they qualify to become an official government school with all of the funding. One of the challenges that we're meeting there, or that we're finding there, is to become an official government school may lower quality. So we want to be sure that there's some autonomy that they maintain as community groups to sustain quality that we're helping them develop. We haven't been doing a very good job with this. And the intern from your program that we took last year did a very nice evaluation of this community school program, and that helped us think about how we could work on this today. So you all can join us. Not all of you, one of you, two. Okay. So speed school around the world that started in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, with Geneva Global funding Stroma Foundation, which is a Norwegian foundation, to implement speed school in West Africa. We had the opportunity to move to Ethiopia in 2011, and we asked Stroma if we could fund them to implement the program there. They went to their board, and their board said, we don't want to be in Ethiopia right yet. You do it. So we did it. So we've been implementing speed school in Ethiopia since 2011. In 2016, we moved it to Uganda, or we added Uganda. So we're just about to start our 4th year in Uganda. And in 2017, we launched implementation in Liberia, where it's been struggling for reasons that you might suspect, in addition to the fact that we don't have enough funding to really build it up yet. We basically say to get a new program started, we need at least $2 million a year. Because we need the infrastructure on the ground, we need to be able to do proper training, we need a critical mass of schools to develop the experience, and we started with $700,000 a year in Liberia, and no funding visible beyond the 2nd year. So that was a challenge. Speed school is not a unique model. Some of you may have heard of the Accelerated Education Working Group, which is supporting or tracking and trying to create guidelines for accelerated education globally. One of the questions, or at least one of the questions you asked, was about how this seems like an appropriate model for refugee settings. In fact, most of the work that Accelerated Education Working Group is connected with is accelerated classes in refugee settings. Ours is the outlier, working outside of refugee settings. Geneva Global is working, as I mentioned, in Ethiopia since 2011. We're now at just over 175,000 children who have been in speed school classes, including this year's cohort. 83% are still in school. That's from 2011. There are 5,282 self-help groups that have operated, which means 5,282 speed school classes. And the link schools, there's about 3 speed school classes for 1 link school. So it's basically divided by 3. In Uganda, we've been operating since 2016 with over 18,000 children having been brought back into the school system. There also, I think we've got over 90% of the kids who start the program transition to the formal system. The large majority of whom transition to grade 4, because we cover the first 3 grades, so I'll repeat in a moment. Over 700 self-help groups in about 235 other schools. In Liberia, we started in 2017, about 6,000 total out-of-school children. We don't implement this anymore. Our funder took it over for implementation. 240 parent groups in 82 schools. The model combines the basic model, it's an alternative model. The goal is re-entry or entry. In Ethiopia, actually, we decided only to enroll kids who had never been in school before. Because, one, there are a lot of them, but also we found that it was hard for us to keep out children whose parents took them out of the formal school and put them right into the speed school classroom, which upset the government. Rightly so, and also was counter to our own purposes, right? So in Ethiopia, we made that decision because it's very hard to manage. We do it, but it's a challenge to manage, as you would expect. Aged 8 to 14, working with a trained and supported facilitator. A couple of you asked about the training of the facilitators, just really quickly, and I'll be happy to go into more depth later if anyone wants. The facilitators have a grade 10 or grade 12 certificate. The requirement is a grade 10 or grade 12 certificate. We do not require teacher training. We do not require experience. Okay? We bring them out, we give them an intensive training at the beginning of the year. In Ethiopia, they do one training of 15 days. In Uganda, they do 3 trainings of 5 days over the course of the year, which actually I prefer. And then we support them. The original model was what we call either a community mobilizer in Ethiopia or a supervisor in Uganda visits them once a week to observe, to give feedback, and to help strengthen their practice. I've been modifying that model, trying to have the visits less frequently, but to be more substantive, and combining that with education, community, and practice, so that in between the visits, the teachers aren't sitting there waiting for help. They're engaged in shared reflective practice. But we put a lot of importance in this. I asked our research group in Uganda last year to run the numbers to see how well the children who are in classes with a grade 10 leaver who only receive training from us do compared to speed school facilitators who have experience and formal training as teachers. Compare this to 2 groups. Not surprising, but still sort of lamentably, our trained teachers outperform, or the students of our trained teachers outperform the teachers with certification and formal experience. And we can talk more about why I think that might be later if you like. 25, we're in the process of growing it to 30 children per class, which especially in Uganda is huge because you can be in a classroom easily with over 100 kids in Uganda. I was in a primary school classroom in Uganda with 300 children sitting on the floor. So you can do pretty much anything with 30 kids and get a better outcome. But I don't think that's what's happening. Activity-based learning with abundant low-cost and no-cost materials. We are focused on learner-centered, activity-based instruction. I'll talk a little bit about that, more about that later, and can go into it if you like. Kids are in the classroom 7 hours a day, 5 days a week in Uganda, 5.5 days a week in Ethiopia. Some of their classmates in the link schools are only there half day on dual shifts. We cover the official government grade 1, 2, and 3 curricula in a 10-month period. They're tested after each phase, equivalent to grade, And there's a placement test at the end to determine whether they'll go into grade 4, grade 3, grade 2, or sometimes into grade 5. This is done with the government, who's going to be responsible for absorbing it. And the whole thing is implemented by local civil society partners, organizations, which is valuable. Even if they're not education experts, we can help them become that. But they know the context, they know the players, at the communities, at the government, in the broader arena. They're bringing other work they're doing in support of these communities to complement the education input that we're making. And we're helping strengthen them so that they can do more with more funding, more partners in the lab. The methods, as I said, activity-based learning with learner-centered instruction. A lot of peer instruction. The kids are set in the classroom around tables, grouping 5 students. So 5 groups of 5, now 5 groups of 6. So I'm actually thinking that 5 groups of 6 will be easier for a teacher because everybody's paired than 5 groups of 5. They do independent and group discovery with the activity-based learning. The activity-based learning includes things like game-based, music-based, community-based, nature-based, family-based, making the connection with the world around them so that they're better motivated to learn. They can learn their math better when they're learning by applying it, not just as an equation on the blackboard. And it's going to be useful for them. A lot of projects and activities. I mentioned the contact with the real world. Interdisciplinary learning. The curriculum in Ethiopia has geography, science, civics, literacy, numeracy. We focus on literacy and numeracy. And they have a thematic-based curriculum. So we bring in all of the science and civics and geography and light when we're reading about it, when we're doing math about it. Continuous assessment with feedback and remediation, and more, one thing that I want to add to this list is we put a lot of emphasis on learning objectives across academic, application, and personal skills, and weaving them together. As some of you commented or queried in your questions, saying we're going to do this and doing this are 2 different things. This is not easy. Some of you mentioned how you're teachers and you've been struggling with doing this. Okay. We don't train them and say, you're done. Go off and prosper. We recognize that it's difficult, and we work with visits, with the communities of practice. We continue to develop new materials, handouts, and sample lessons and things to give them experience and confidence in doing this. And over the 2 years, I've seen a lot of progress. But we don't do this thinking that they're going to become expert at it just because we train them in it. The training that we're going to be doing in Ethiopia, the biggest message I have to them, to give to them, is that you already know the what. You already know all this stuff. Half the people will be able to give much more eloquent technical presentations on all of these topics than I could ever dream of doing. But when someone comes up and gives you a 2-hour lecture on learner-centered instruction, you've got to scratch your head and say, can you do it? Are they going to be able to help me do it? So it's not the what to do, it's the how to do. And the how to do includes what the training you give teachers, but it also includes all of the contexts in which the teachers are working that you need to be able to help them to do that. So if you tell a teacher, bring in local context, but the curriculum and the textbooks are so jam-packed that they can't step foot outside the classroom without getting 3 days behind, you're not creating conditions that are conducive for teachers to do what you're training and expecting them by your rhetoric to do, because your rhetorical expectations are in stark conflict with your practical expectations. Is that okay? So, got ahead of myself again. Focus on how, not on what. Don't ignore the what, but focus on the how. Okay, so when you go into a speed school classroom, what will you see? You'll see happy kids. You will see fully engaged, active, supportive facilitators. Creative, kinetic, learning noise. Usually, teachers don't like noise. Collaborative, active, fun, multidimensional learning. Practical and relevant instruction and learning. Rich, stimulating, effective learning materials. Every classroom you go into, all 6 surfaces are covered with learning materials. The 4 walls, the floor, and the ceiling. And you'll see kids learning and persisting in schooling better than their peers. And I'll talk a little bit about that more in a minute. You saw the Sussex study. Okay, the school elements, the condensed curriculum I've spoken about, the adapted classrooms, paraprofessional facilitator with longer hours, 25 to 30 kids. Now, when you're doing the financial math, this is something Louise Crouch drew to my attention. 30 kids, 25 kids, financially becomes 75 or 90 children that you pay for in the 1 year because you're getting 3 years of education out of that, of learning out of that. So that makes the comparative math a lot more favorable. So we're spending about, in Ethiopia we calculated at about $130 per child. And that's not just for the classroom, that's our company fees and staffing and my travel to Ethiopia, all included. Okay. So $130 per child becomes, what's 3 into 130? Okay. Thank you. 43. Okay. $43 per child, which is pretty competitive. Okay.
What is, roughly, if you know, per pupil expenditure by the government?
I don't remember. It's in my notes somewhere. I don't remember off the top of my head. In Liberia, it's $450 per child. One, our partner is more costly than we are. But also just things are a lot more expensive in Liberia. Peer learning is something we have to work with a lot with the teachers, and the concept of peer learning is much deeper than sitting kids around the same table. And then what I consider the secret sauce are these additional 6 elements. Activity-based learning. Students learn by doing, by analyzing, by struggling, by redoing, and they do it together in a lot of different contexts. Learner-centered students, and this is the idea that students can learn even if you're not teaching them. And often they can learn better than if you're teaching them. Dr. Gershberg earlier was talking about his experience with a colleague who commented how we become so expert at something we forget what it is like to struggle to learn it. So if we're teaching the way we understand it, we may be completely missing the way what our students need to be focusing on to understand it. Emphasis on reading. In Uganda, in Acholi, and in English, and we've just introduced phonics into our program in Uganda. In Ethiopia, in many classes, they learn in 3 languages: the mother tongue, Amharic, if that's not the mother tongue, and English. Phonics will be more difficult in on-heart because there are over 300 on-heart letters. Continuous assessment, checking, and stopping and revisiting when we find that the check yields unsatisfactory results. Integrated applied learning, as I mentioned, all subjects are taught under math and reading. And holistic objectives, not just what you're learning, the content, but how you can apply it and the personal competencies, behaviors, skills required to be able to do it. I'm talking about things like critical thinking, creativity, problem solving, collaboration, communication, grit. Okay, so the indicators of success you've seen, and many of you have read or at least perused this document. Stronger academic learning when they transition into the formal classroom, into the government classroom. And on the tests of language and literacy, or language and numeracy that we give them. There's a very high transition rate to formal school in Ethiopia. 95% of the kids who start the year end the year, 95% of those kids go on to the formal classroom, not all in the 4th grade, but over 70 or 75% of them in the 4th grade. They are happier, feel safer, work harder, have more family help at home, higher attendance rates, stronger personal competencies, and higher performance and retention across primary school. When you tell the government that this is what you're getting, they listen. Okay, the experience, I won't read all of these. Can you see this in the back, or is it too small? Too small, okay. So, Asmara Desu, 10 years old. I want to thank the organization for alpha classes. It's what they call speed school in Ethiopia. If not for them, I would never go to school because it made me feel awkward to sit and attend class with younger kids. Yet I had not even been privileged to do that due to poverty, but now I'm going to be in 4th grade just like my friends. I'm going to skip that. So a self-help group member, our children have found eyes and their minds are wide open, so we are very happy. The favorite thing I heard from the self-help group, from self-help groups, a couple mothers, fathers said, we now look after the goats. The opportunity cost, their kids having the chance to learn. Poverty is a serious barrier, but the greatest barrier, to my mind, is quality. Parents have to make a decision. Often we think if they don't send their kids to school, that they don't care about their children's education. They care deeply about their children's education. What they're trying to determine is whether their children are going to get an education that equips them for life better at school or at home. And often they make a very wise decision to bring them out of school, to bring them home, to get an education that's going to serve them in life. Maybe not the life they would prefer for their children, but the life that their children are more likely to find. So this idea of equality is something that doesn't get treated enough. And it's a big factor in access. Often there's access quality. It's either one or the other, and we don't talk often enough about how they're stages between them. My parents are divorced and unable to send me to school. I look after cattle and do other home activities such as fetching water. At 14, an opportunity comes along, speed school. I got a chance to join, and I'm one of the outstanding in my class. I hold a lot of hope for years to come in pursuing my education at a higher stage. I'm very glad for the chance in the late school years of my life. Now, this girl, soon to be young lady, entering at 14, our goal is to have a program that allows her to continue all the way through secondary school. into post-secondary education. Few 14 girls who enter grade 4 and 15 years old are going to find their way through high school. Although we had another model, which was a second chance secondary school that brought 20 and even some 30-year-olds back into secondary education. So it is possible. This was in Ethiopia. But I want us to start thinking about how we can make sure that this experience also meets the needs of children who are unlikely to continue their education. We're not there yet, but it's something that we're thinking about. From the McKelly University evaluation, it's essential to mention that speed school is a highly effective way to bring primary education to the sizable out-of-school children population, and that the model itself warrants being scaled and sustained. It both offers vital basic skills to youth and serves as a reliable pathway into the formal education system. Now, some of you asked about government adoption, which is what we're working on very strongly. This sort of activity is really important. If we go to the government and say, look how great we are, look at our numbers, there's an automatic suspicion. If we get an independent university from the location to do this research and give them carte blanche to discover what they discover, and they go and present this to the government, the Tigray region was the first to launch its own speed school classes. Last year they did 32 of their own speed school classes. This year they're doing 40 of their own speed school classes. Okay? Having this sort of advocacy based on empirical evidence done by an independent source is invaluable. Okay. So the model, looking at institutionalization. Our goal related to the model is for national primary schools to establish and operate classrooms in all communities with eligible out-of-school children. There's only so much we can do with our resources. I'll tell another anecdote. When I was leading the project in Morocco, we presented the project to the ambassador, the US ambassador at the time. And at the same time, there was a study that USAID had commissioned showing that, I think the number was 0.4% of spending in education in Morocco at the time was attributable to international partners. 0.4%. Okay? His question was, what the hell are we doing investing in education when we've got such a small stake in it? The rest of it was families, local business or philanthropy, and the government. My argument to him was it's only 0.4%, but it's the flea on the tail of the dog wagging the tail. It's making the tail wag so that the dog wags the tail. Right? The 0.4% isn't the tail wagging the dog, it's the flea making the dog wag its tail. Right? So there's no way we can have a quantifiable, numerical impact. We need the resources that are available through the government itself. So if we're going to reach these 2 million, it's not going to happen no matter how much money we're able to generate. We want the official structures to accept, to recruit high school graduates to train, supervise, and support as facilitators, train them in the summers to become certified primary school teachers. Last year, not this year, last year, the Ethiopian government told us any new facilitators that we hired had to be trained by the government, had to be government trained, because they did not have confidence that a grade 10 graduate could deliver the class education adequately. We said, okay. We trained up their trained teachers in the model. I think every single one of them found a job in a formal government school before our year started. So we had to go back to the grade 10 graduates and train them up again so that we had teachers in the classroom, facilitators in the classroom. And now I think when we do the same research in Ethiopia that we did in Uganda, I'm expecting a similar results. That the kids from our classes, with our teachers that we trained exclusively, will outperform. And the reason is simple, and it's, you can't teach old dogs new tricks. They're trained in standing in the front and delivering the program. Ours are not trained that way. They're trained very differently. And the training we deliver to them is not like I'm doing with you right now. It's very experiential. Okay. So this is something that's going to be a bit of a struggle, but I think we'll make good progress with. We want the system to authorize speed school in official policy, to authorize the curriculum, the condensed curriculum, and the strategy so that it can operate officially and not be just an exception that they're letting happen as an experiment. And we want to help the system to assess the students so that they can transition into the traditional classroom. On the methods, we want all teachers using the curriculum in a flexible, interdisciplinary way with official blessing. That means when the inspector comes, they applaud and support classroom innovation and flexibility, not rigidity. Teachers employ activity-based, student-centered instructional methods effectively and regularly. In the training, I tell them teacher-centered is not bad, but as a rule of thumb, I say 80% of the talking should be done by the students. It's sort of arbitrary, but it makes it. Pre- and in-service teacher training and teacher supervision, there should be supervision. It's not supervision. Such instruction. And the official curriculum, text, and other pedagogical materials favor interdisciplinary student-centered instruction. Continuous assessment means feedback and remediation, and there's regular teacher collaboration, consultation, the communities of practice. Okay, so looking forward, we have demonstrated empirically and qualitatively, and we've done it with our research, our monitoring and evaluation. We've done it with joint monitoring trips by central and local officials into our classrooms. We've done it by including officials in our trainings. We've done it by supporting local universities and other partners in conducting research on our behalf, independent, objective research on our behalf. So we've done it in a lot of different ways. The model brings out-of-school children into education. The model gives them the core literacy, numeracy, and other competencies to be able to learn in a school setting and outside. It sends 95% of the kids who complete the year into the conventional school where they excel. They excel academically, they're leaders in their class, they're models in their communities, and their families are helping them more. So the experience and impacts of the Speed School have yielded official interest to adopt and scale the model in both countries. Emulation by teachers in the linked schools. Many of the you're in a classroom and you see all these kids making noise and active, and they come into your classroom from the year before, and they're the ones with their hands up, and they're answering the questions, and they're asking the questions. Like, what's going on there? How do I get me some of that? Right? So there, either the head teachers or the teachers of their own initiative are reaching out to our speed school facilitators saying, help me, what are you doing? And our speed school facilitators know that they can get help, and we encourage this from the classroom teachers who are better trained, better trained in the content, and in some of the science and pedagogy and things like that. So the exchange is really rich. Government interest to incorporate the model, the methods into the formal school classrooms, which is a bit of a challenge because in a class of 30, having groups of 5 or 6 kids sitting around a table together, it's not the same as having groups of 5 or 6 sitting around a table together in a classroom of 120. So there are a lot of things that we still need to work on with them, and we're trying to engage in an action research approach to working with formal schools to help discover what we can do to make these adjustments to the model so they're better suited to the realities of their classrooms. And then the openness to the districts funding their own speed school classes in Ethiopia regions. Okay, so as a result, Geneva Global and the government have agreed to pursue a strategy together to allow the country to sustain and scale the speed school and mainstream methods. Okay, that's kind of the holy grail in this business, and it's far too rare that we do it. And I'll just give a very quick take on why it's so difficult in a conventional USAID-funded project. In a USAID-funded project, you as a partner of USAID, whether it be FHI 360, Creative Associates, Save the Children, whoever, you've got a 5-year contract to meet your benchmarks. And your job is not, your job rhetorically is to improve the quality of education in the country. The job that pays you is to meet your benchmarks. So you do everything in your power to meet those benchmarks, which means a lot of things. It means scaffolding, making sure that the teachers are doing just what you want them to do, with no notion of how to dismantle the scaffold when they are doing it and can do something other than follow a scripted lesson. It means working in a smaller number of schools so that you can control all the things that are happening. And it means focusing on learning outcomes, even if the strategies to get there are not sustainable or not suited to the common classroom. Okay? For me, that's a huge problem and a huge challenge that the conventional funding of programs do not accommodate, or where they're failing. So, we've got what we've proposed to both countries right now are 4 adoption outcomes. Okay. The first is continue and scale up the speed school classrooms. The second is to sustain and scale the self-help groups. Self-help groups pose a bit of a problem because it's unlikely that the government is going to give groups of 25 mothers $500 a year to implement income-generating activities. They already can't fund all the classrooms that they need, right? So we're working with this. One idea is to bring in other ministries that are focused on rural development or community development or mother, women's programs, things like that, to work on that aspect in collaboration with the education ministry. And in others, as I think I mentioned earlier, to put more focus on other aspects of social empowerment and the functional literacy. Strengthen the quality of formal education, and then continue with the work in the community schools. We're proposing this over a 3 to 5 year. What time is it?
3 o'clock, so.
3 o'clock? What time did I start?
Well, don't worry about it, so maybe it'll take another 5 minutes.
Okay. I'll go through this quickly because I've said most of it already anyhow. So we're proposing a 3 to 5 year process. We've got 3 years of funding guaranteed, so the 5 years is aspirational. Okay. So very quickly, this is continuing the classrooms. This is supporting the systems within the government that will allow them to operate their own classrooms. So things like training inspectors, we're developing a speed school toolkit, and the internship that I am recruiting for is to help us especially with completing the speed school toolkit, which brings all the things together under one package. So I'm happy to connect with anyone interested in that. The idea is that our funding will go down as government funding goes up of the classrooms. Our funding is grants to local NGOs. Same thing on the self-help group side. I've talked about financial empowerment, adding social empowerment and functional literacy. And then the primary schools help the linked schools, but also help the government help other schools. I mentioned that we're going to be doing a training coming up for 4,000 schools in Ethiopia. Very cool. Looking at pre-service training, and one idea that we're toying with the government is, rather than the traditional path of graduating grade 10 or grade 12 and going into teacher training for 2 or 3 years, and then coming out into a classroom with your certificate, leave grade 10 or 12, go straight into a speed school classroom, do our training, do summer training with the government so that they're getting paid, the government's paying them less, but they're earning and learning practically in a classroom setting with 30 kids rather than going through conventional training and getting dumped into a classroom with 70, 80 kids where they don't get to practice pedagogy. All they get to do is practice classroom management. So we're toying with this idea with the government right now. There seems to be interest. I mentioned the e-call, communities of practice, in-service training, and we're toying with a lot of different innovations. And I can talk more about that later if it's interesting. And then the ECD is the same thing. Training, funding, and community support. Our targets over the 3 years, you can see the numbers of government, Geneva local, and government. We're just submitting, finalizing a proposal to a funder that needs matching funds. And we got the government to send us a letter saying that they are committed over the next 3 years to 500, a minimum of 500 classes. But getting the government to commit for a 3-year program is phenomenal. Same, these are the numbers for the self-help group for schools and community school models. You can check this online later if you want those numbers. Give you an idea of the costs. In Uganda, the speed school class is about $3,200, so if it's 30 kids, it's about $100 a kid. 25, obviously more. Self-help groups, now it's about 560. That includes the micro grants and the technical assistance. Primary strengthening is $765, which I just learned, and that's exorbitant to me. We need to do something about that. And then preschool class is $1,160 for a class of 25 learners, and the community school is $1,300 for a class, and it's more than 25 learners in those classes. Next steps, agree with the government, centrally and locally, or decentrally. Is that a word? It is now. Agree on adoption goals and strategic objectives with concrete targets. Just like I said, identify who's responsible for this, with whom are we going to be working, and who's going to be responsible to take it forward. draft and sign a memorandum of understanding with a broad plan with these different levels of authority, create a group to monitor and advance the adoption process, and then bring on new partners. My expectation is as the government brings on or takes on funding of these classes, they'll be reaching out to the Global Education Partnership, or GP, Global Partnership for Education, World Bank, DFID, European Union, to bring in money for doing this. Thank you.
And you did a really good job of summarizing that. I gave him all the questions to train in today. I did ask a couple of people, I sent out an email to a couple of people who asked questions that I thought were interesting.
So my peer Alejandra and I actually had questions about the role of language in the classroom. And in the article, and you also mentioned that there's the English, the majority, or the local language, and then another language. So is there a dominant language that, or the medium of instruction, and how does the language play out in terms of like assessments, like your assessments, but also the government's assessment? And then I don't know what Alejandro wants to ask after, but yeah.
We recognize that learning has to begin in the mother tongue. We go with the policy of the government as regards mother tongue. So in Ethiopia, they start in mother tongue, but by the time they reach grade 4, they're learning in Amharic as the language of instruction. So we have to make that transition, that linguistic leap, in 10 months, not in 3 years. So that's what we're working on. We're getting them up to the level where they need to be to enter and succeed in grade 4. And it's hard, but it's amazing what they're able to do. I can't go into much more detail than that about how we manage it linguistically, other than say that we work on both the language. We've got in Uganda, we begin with phonics in Levacholi, do that for a month or 2, and then we introduce phonics in English. Fortunately there, it's basically the same alphabet. There's a couple of variations. But we haven't started with phonics in Ethiopia yet. It's so hard. There's too many letters. Does that?
Yeah, and what's the language of assessment for the government? Is it in their language or in English?
It's.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'm pretty sure it's in Acholi in Uganda, and I'm pretty sure it's in Amharic in Ethiopia. But Amharic's not the mother tongue for many kids. Yep.
So I wanted to take the part of just that one thing that didn't come out of the questions in the discussion, but that's fine. When I read your bio and it talked about like design, implementation, evaluation, and sustainability, I couldn't help thinking about the hot topic of theory of change, right? And this is a program that's been around a while now. So I wonder if you could actually take us back to that moment before it was reality. And if you can remember what your theory of change was and how it evolved over time.
Yeah, like you've seen, it dates back to the early mid-2000s, and I only date back 2 years with that.
Okay.
So I don't have that historical view. But I feel like we're kind of retrofitting it with the theory of change, because we didn't talk about theory of change in the early or mid-2000s. Or we talked about it, but it's the same thing that we talked about under a different name once upon a time. But it's, even in the 2 years when I've been involved, it's evolved a lot. And part of it is, it's just my bringing more of a pedagogical rigor to it. The folks who took it on in the beginning in Uganda, where I've been involved with and trained there as in English, in Ethiopia it's in Amharic, I could just watch. At the beginning they did, it was very experiential, but it was a lot of simulation. And I talked to you a little bit about simulation earlier, I think here. Did I? Okay. So I'm not a big one on simulating teacher training as micro-teaching. In the same way that I'm not a fan of classroom observation. Two reasons. One, when you come in to observe me, I'm going to be on my damn best behavior. And two, you're only getting a snapshot of an epic length movie. Okay? So you may come in and say, you don't do any active learning. And that day maybe it's a day when I was delivering a new content and the whole rest of the week was planning for active learning. So they had a big push on experience, and then critique and evolve, and very little conceptual presentation. So I went and said, we need to catch up on the concepts, much to their chagrin, because they learned that it's got to be learner-centered, and didn't see that learner-centered needs to be balanced with teacher-centered, active, fun teacher-centered, and put a lot of emphasis on micro-teaching. And it took me a while to click and say, they still want, we can still do the micro lessons, but I don't want them to be demonstrating or to experiencing it as teachers. I want them to be experiencing it as students, as learners, so they can have the emotional and the cognitive sensation of what the learning we're trying to get them to do, not what teaching we want them to do, give them that perspective on it. And that's been a sea change, at least in Uganda. So those sorts of evolutions have happened. And then the whole idea of government adoption. I call this Speed School version 2, or 2.0. Okay. Version 1, or 1.0 was, let's see if this model works and get it working. And I'd like, one of my expressions that I'd like to say is, our success gives us the opportunity to be more ambitious. So our success with version 1.0 has given us the ambition to change the theory. This last bit here, the bars across, that was kind of our theory of change now, but our original theory of change was the goal. Well, not even the goal. The goal, the theory of change originally was if you bring out school children into a condensed curriculum, accelerated classroom, you can get them prepared for re-entry or entry into the primary school.
Just to follow up a little quick, because you said it's interesting, you talk about what your success allows you to do. Why don't you talk about what failure allows you to do and how important it is to have the space to fail? I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit. And also, certainly, since we were talking about USA projects, for instance, there's not much room to fail there.
No, there's not. There's not. Well, I talk about how, I often talk about how our children are outperforming their classmates. In reality, they're just not performing as badly as their classmates, who are performing abysmally. So we're performing not better necessarily, or well, we're just performing less abysmally. So for me, that's a failure. Going into the classrooms, when I first started with the program, and still, and watching teachers try really hard to do what they learned, but still talking over 80% of the time. Over 80% of the words come out of their mouths, not out of their kids. So I'm continuously facing this, which is effectively a failure. It's not really a failure, but it just highlights the challenge of getting to where you really want to be with this stuff. Saying, okay, let's step back. What else can we do, or what can we do differently to help the teachers get to this point? So that's where the idea of communities of practice comes in. That's where the idea of turning the micro lessons on their heads come in. We were doing training pretty much, in Uganda, I said we did training 3 times a year. We're now entering our 4th cohort, our 4th year. So some of our trainers, or some of our facilitators, will be with us for the 4th year. We don't have a real plan for how to train them. We just throw everybody, new facilitators, 1st year, 2nd year, 4th year facilitators, all into the same room. So it's, these new challenges that emerge that you could have anticipated maybe, but you didn't because that wasn't your focus at the time. So being alert to what's going on, and going back to my idea earlier that I shared at lunch, if you get to the end of a project having done exactly what you said you were going to do in your original plan, you weren't paying attention, you need to be able to be alert to what's not happening that you maybe didn't even know you should be looking for at the beginning, as well as the things that you're clearly struggling with.
So I'm wondering about collective buy-in, because the classroom seems so different from the traditional classroom might be, and these are already kids who have not been to school, so how do you actually convince parents to send these children to school? I mean, there is that support system, but
Right. Yeah, because they've already made that decision. You're right. And what's different about this? And part of it's a pitch, a sales job. And a lot of it is, some of the stories you get from kids are, my mother died, I went to live with my aunt, she didn't have the money, she knows how important schooling is for me, she didn't have the money to do it. Then this opportunity came up, or my uncle heard of this opportunity, and called me to come live with him so that I could do it. So there are stories like that, and there's a lot of people, and sort of, I talk about the idealists, the empiricists, and the cynics, and the sheep. The idealists see the idea and say, I want in, and those are the people who come to the class first. And then there are the empiricists who say, let me see how this goes. Ooh, this is working. I want in. And that includes, unfortunately, parents of kids who are already in school. And then the cynics are, and we tend not to worry about them because there's nothing we're going to do. And there are enough of the others. And then the largest group are the sheep who follow. So I don't know if that...
I'm just wondering, because the classroom setup being activity-based and student-centered is so different from the way if the parents have had any experience in schooling, it might have been their experience. And I'm wondering if there's any resistance around that, or do the parents ever come in and say something? I'm just curious if that's ever happened.
I've not had that experience, but I came in late. I wasn't in on the ground floor. And at this point, it's really taken on that, so it has a reputation. All right, moving it up. Anyone else?
So you mentioned that some parents are actually taking their children out of the government schools because it's sick and they can get something about faster and like better quality. So in the future, do you think that this could become a trend, like send your students to a 1-year school instead of a 3-year primary school? And how does the government look at that?
Yeah, it's
And
funny.
how do you kind of in the long-term plan, how does it fall into
Some of the researchers with whom we work, and even some of the government folks, or other stakeholders outside of education, ask that very question. Like, if you get this success with these kids, why don't we do this with all the classes? One, it's a lot more investment in teachers, in classes. Two, I don't know that we have the same sort of success with 6 and 7-year-olds that we have with 8 and 9-year-olds. Because one of the things we do in the training is we ask the teachers to think about what are the challenges that these out-of-school children bring to the classroom, and what are the assets that they bring? What are the advantages they bring by being older? More experience, more motivation, having, they've gotten the rudiments of numeracy and literacy. So I don't think that it may work having education in blocks of 3 years. But there are also all the social angles of having the kids start school at 6 years old. It's a really interesting question, but I'm not confident that I answered it.
You could have parents saying, no, I'll send you in 3 years for that.
Yeah, that's what I was
Yeah.
saying. Parents might be like, oh, that's not done with school right now, but, and then when they're.
Yeah, except when you've got a 6 or 7-year-old child, they're not as useful at home. So you need to keep your older kids home to look after them. But yes.
So it's really interesting to know about the success of these models in schools. I'm wondering, how are the evaluations done? Are these qualitative, are they quantitative, mix, are the experiments that are on these students?
A combination.
Conference of faculty members, so he hasn't had to, he didn't have to.
Okay, very good. It's a combination. It's a combination. We have, and we're trying to establish relationships with local universities to bring their students in to do their capstones or theses on stuff like this, do some action research projects with us. But we had, in Ethiopia, we had the advantage of funding for Sussex University, or University of Sussex, to come in and do research over a 6-year period. So there's a longitudinal study, which I will present you, and then a bunch of other studies that are available that they've done over the course of the 6 years.
And first, just anyone who wasn't at lunch who wants to ask a question.
So we didn't read about the Liberia program in any of the readings, and I was really struck by kind of just the little snapshot you gave us about knowing that there wasn't enough money to run successfully, but doing it anyway. So I was just curious what that decision-making process looked like when you knew.
Actually, it was our funder wanted us to do it.
Okay.
They were funding us to do it in Ethiopia, and they wanted us to do it in Liberia too.
Were there, I'm just curious about their reasons. Do you know their reasons?
Because they thought they could get more money to do it. They had a couple initial funders that they thought, and there's great need for it. It's a relevant program there. It's really meaningful and it would make a huge contribution. And they thought that they could convince more people that they eventually were able to convince to fund it.
My question is, you said that you're providing a monetary incentive for fathers to get their students at school, but as soon as the students finish this school year and they go back to normal school, the money is not there, right?
Well, no, it's not a monetary incentive. It's a micro grant for them to set up or to strengthen existing income generating activities. So the idea is to help them create a sustainable source of additional revenue that they would have available to them to send their kids to school. But it was interesting because at the beginning, one of the questions that the researchers were trying to get a handle on, and I don't think they succeeded entirely in doing it, was asking whether mothers are bringing their kids to school so that they can have the monetary input from the micro grants, or whether they were participating in the self-help groups because they wanted to bring their kids to school. And at the beginning, the researchers went in with the assumption and actually played out empirically the argument that it was the former, that the money was why they were enrolling their kids. In the end, in the longitudinal study, 3 or 4 years later, they concluded that the self-help group was a very critical factor in the participation of the kids. So that they did the self-help group, and it was very influential in their kids succeeding and continuing in that classroom.
And the micro grant was at the self-help group level or at the individual family?
Self-help group level. Some of them did group activities, some went into smaller groups, and some did individual groups.
You spoke a little bit about teacher recruitment and that process. What about retention? Has there been any challenges or successes in terms of teacher retention that are trained in this? And, like they decide to go for a job a year or two and be effective?
I don't have the exact numbers, but the experience we have is a lot stay. And part of the challenge of that is that we don't stay in the same community for many years. Because we'll exhaust the out-of-school children in that community, then we'll go where there's a greater need. And we are pointed in those directions by the local authorities. That we want you here because the problem is bigger here. We want the facilitators to be local because we want them to have a relationship with the community. Some will follow in their locale, but if there's no school nearby, we may not retain them or they may choose not to stay. A lot will go into teaching, and we've had stories of great successes. Former speed school facilitators going into official schools and becoming school directors without the background that many others have, and being sought after by private and public schools. So those are the sorts of things, but we may have the numbers, but I don't have
Oh, this one got my question already, yeah.
Okay, so my question is not really about schools, but in general about the background which you come from. So sustainability goals are a hot topic that's going on right now and that we should be studying. So besides securing government funding for scaling and implementing the pilot projects such as these schools, what are the other ways to ensure sustainability in programs like these in rural communities?
Sustainability happens in projects I count 3 basic ways. One, the people with whom you interact directly keep it alive. It doesn't diffuse anywhere, but they keep it going, so that benefit remains. The other is at the local level of the system, some of them will adopt it and keep it alive within the existing context, within the parameters that the government provides for. And then the third is what I'm describing here, where it really becomes woven into the warp and move of the system, so that it's in their plans, in their programs, in their budgets, in their institutional responsibilities. It's being measured. And for me, that's what you're aiming for. I don't want sustainability to mean that the model, the way we did it at this time and in this place, has to look the same everywhere forever and in the future. It's got to evolve. So a part of the sustainability is the ownership, not just financially or programmatically, but intellectually, so that you can adjust it as need for adjustment shows itself, appears.
So I think we're sort of winding it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a piece of paper and a pen, and we're going to gather. Let me see how many hands there are still left. put your hand down if you went to lunch. You have your access to him. All right, well, we'll gather up
3 or 4.
3 or 4. Let's see where we get, and then so we go 1, 2, 3. You didn't already have. Okay. And 4. We'll do those 4, and then we'll see where it gets.
Okay.
Yes, I wanted to know a little bit more about the assessments. Do you use specific assessments to measure academic grading outcomes? And what are some of the other things that you were mentioning throughout the program in terms of, let's say, women language or classroom management?
So I'd like to know a little bit more about business model.
Speak louder.
Okay. I'd like to know a little bit more about business model because this is for profit advisory firm. So I'd like to know how you're making money out of this project actually.
As Geneva Global.
Yes. And also when you say cost per class, I'd like to know how the cost consists of. If it's all about human resource cost or that is including all the teaching materials as well.
Okay.
So my question was about, on a grand scale, Geneva Global seems like there are trainers and trained teachers. So I'm wondering at what point along that line are local contexts taken into account and woven into curriculum?
My question is around, given the model of schools is such that you only take students who have never been to school before, and they're taught in a school environment where, which is like activity-based and more practical approach. So I was wondering how has the transition been like for students who later go out to public schools, which I'm assuming is more traditional, and since sustainability is at the core of the model, how do you measure the student outcome in the longer after it?
Sorry, we also have one more question here.
Okay.
I was just wondering if you're following up with the graduates of the program,
Following up with,
the people graduating from the program, completing the program. Do they want to come back to the program after seeing that the business services is great in the public school?
very good.
I know I saw there were also additionally 3 or 4 other questions, but we're going to see how much you can hold us head.
Okay.
Time is
So, assessment, we assess against the curricular standards of the government. So when we end phase 1, which is equivalent of primary 1, we look at what a grade 1 student in a government school is meant to learn and assess against that. And then, so we do that at the end of grade 1, phase 1, grade 2, grade 3. And then we have a placement exam that the government develops for us. We also do a pre-test, post-test independently, our researchers. It's interesting, in Liberia, we used agra-agma at the beginning. And on many of the measures, the items of agra-agma, the students did more poorly on M1 than on the baseline. Because the instruction was not agra-agma instruction, it was more holistic. They did much better on the placement test, so they met the requirements of graduating grade 3. So it was we got those results here. So that's what we're doing. The business model, when we get $2 million, $2 million a year from a client, part of that goes to our fees. Okay? Pays my salary, keeps the lights on, keeps me connected to internet. Sometimes it pays for my travel to the country. Part of it goes to the office operations in country. We have staff there, we have computers there, and office, and transportation. And the bulk of it, we aim for about 75% goes to grants, to the local civil society. That grant money also includes our cost for training them. Okay? And so the cost per class is calculated on whatever you see in the classroom, human and physical. It also includes the cost of training and supporting. The teachers, yeah. And the self-help groups separate. So it's the costs of the supervisor who goes to the classroom. It's the cost of bringing the facilitators together. Local content happens in two ways. One, we use the government curriculum. In Ethiopia, each region has its own curriculum. So we have 4 different condensed curricula because we have 4 different regions. In that, the whole idea of activity-based is to take that curriculum and say, okay, let's find how that element in the curriculum, the theme-based, for example. If you're talking about people in my community, you're not looking in a book to find the people in your community. You're going out into the community to find those people. So we create opportunities for interaction and for learning linked to that S content. It's not always easy. It's one of those things that we're getting better and better at so that they become better and better at it. We worry. Who asked this question about when you go into the formal classroom? I think 2 of you asked that question. We worried about that severely, and we're kind of surprised at how well the kids did, because you're in a classroom where you're sitting with your classmates and groups, and you're acting, you're making noise, and then you're up there. You go into a classroom in Ethiopia, and the teachers literally wear lab coats, and they stand at the blackboard and write, and the kids copy. What we found, what we assume, and it's kind of hard to judge this, is that the kids continue to do better for several reasons. One, because they already understand. So when the teacher's up there writing in Amharic or in English on the blackboard, they're following it, and their classmates are not, right? They have better self-learning skills. They also are better at creating a community of learners so that they can support each other because that's in their experience. And in a classroom with 70, 80 children, who are you calling on? The ones raising their hands. Who are raising their hands? Our kids. Because they understand enough to have questions. So that's what I and the researchers from Sussex have concluded is the reason for the persistence. I can't say definitively that that's really what's happening, but it seems reasonable enough to us. So we follow the graduates. It's hard to follow the graduates because we'll move out of the community and we'll lose connection with the school where they're going. We're trying really hard to improve that. This year we're going to be getting the phone numbers of all the parents so that we can do surveys. And I'm in our revamped M&E model, we are committing to checking on all the kids who have gone into the the link schools, the ones with which we work, even if we're not working with them anymore. It's hard because it requires significant additional resources. It's not easy to get to all these places.